Good morning and welcome to another episode of What's Up with Power. I'm Justin Wagner with Team ODZ. We're happy to be here this morning and share with you the basics of training with power. The goal of this show is to help you learn and understand the fundamentals of training with power so you can use those tools to take your cycling abilities to the next level. Whatever that is for you, we want to help you get there. So happy to be here this morning. Hopefully those of you from the US weren't up too late watching fireworks last night, so happy late 4th of July to you all. But we've got a good group here in Zwift. We've got a group ride starting. I'm going to get them kicked off. That'll start here in just over 10 seconds. And once that gets rolling, we'll switch to slides and I will start doing today's presentation, which will be a bit of a content overview of everything we've presented in the last couple months. This would be a great chance to get a refresher or as well as get a feel for all the things we go into depth on this show. So we'll cover them all, and we'll actually then as we move forward, we'll actually start covering those concepts again in depth. So this will kind of be a bit of a replay overview of what we've done, as well as a kind of let you know what we go into depth in the future. So a good way to get a taster of everything we got going on. We're going to be about 15 minutes of presentation, followed by an open 15 minutes of questions and answers. So if you have any questions, let them fly here on the Facebook live chat. Happy to answer them for you when we get there. And got the group ride rolling here. We're going to stick it somewhere between 1.5 to 1.8 watts per kilo. I'm going to make a message here to the group. Great. Group. Okay. I think we're all settled. I'm going to move to the slides here. So I'm calling this the round 2 summaries. We've pretty much just completed our second round of going through the content in the Training and Racing with the Power Meter book. A lot of our content's taken straight from that book. It's a great book by some really good authors. I definitely recommend you seeking it out. Training and Racing with the Power Meter. So, first chapter, we had data-driven athlete. Oops, actually cover that for us, Nate Dunn. So, the first chapter of the book is all about knowing and understanding what you gain from training with a power meter. And so the 4 key things that training with power gets you is it helps you know yourself objectively, know your capabilities, your limits, know those objectively. It also helps you work better with your coach and teammates in planning strategy or in tactics of a race or in communicating workout information between you and your coach. It also helps you focus in and dial your training while being objective and not having external factors influence that training data. So like heart rate and speed can be affected by things other than you getting better. On a particularly windy day, you're either going to be a lot slower or a lot faster, depending on which direction you're going. That's not necessarily the truth with power meter. You're not just going to go out one day and all of a sudden have twice as many watts. If you do, you need to calibrate your power meter. So also, training with power will help you achieve your peak performance. We talk about these things called the Performance Manager Chart, PSS, TTL, ATL. These are the concepts you use for building your training plan that helps you achieve peak performance when you want to peak. And that's one of the keys of training. And that's the end goal of training with power, really. To get yourself in form at the right time. So that's what we cover in chapter 1. Chapter 2, this time around we had Mr. Taylor Thomas from Thomas Endurance Coaching teaching it. And the takeaway we get from this chapter is it's all about understanding the hardware and software components that go into training with power. Understanding where you're calibrating your power meter, having a power meter, the head unit that ties to your power meter. That could be Zwift in this instance, like what I'm doing right now, or when you ride outside, it's going to be like a Wahoo, Stages, a Garmin, one of those head units. There's lots out there. And also then we talked about in detail the different software that exists and what's the purpose of this software. So we'll talk about software that's meant for analyzing a single ride and what kind of power characteristics we typically pull out of a single ride, and what kind of analysis are we going to do when we start looking at multiple rides, over a week, a month. What does the software do for us there, and what are the key components we should be looking for? So that's what we talk about there. Really appreciate having these guys, Taylor Thomas and Nate Dunn from Thomas Endurance Coaching and Data Driven Athlete. They are great presenters. They bring us lots of good flavor. Just can't talk enough about how much we really enjoy having them on the show. So, chapter 3, we had Brett Jenner, on the show. Click back here. I'm really butchering my slides today, but so chapter 3 says, okay, we now understand the basics of why we would train with power from the high level. We understand the tools we need. Now the rubber's starting to hit the road. What are we doing to actually start training with power? So we talked about data collection, having a system down for getting your power files into the right pieces of software, making that as easy as possible so that you don't have to do a lot of work. We're all busy, all have families, jobs, other constraints, and we don't exactly have hours and hours to sit around moving files around. So this is, you want to basically make sure you have your process streamlined so it's just taken care of for you. And so that's kind of the data collection piece of it. And then structured FTP test. We talked about testing protocols that exist, some of their inherent flaws or what they're trying to do. We'll add an anecdote here that the real golden test that we're trying to get at is to measure lactate levels in your blood. And there's a point where essentially your body will start generating lactate as you start putting out more and more power. And there's a threshold, like about 4 millimoles per liter, I believe. I think I got the units right there. And when your body starts generating right at that threshold, however many watts you're generating there is really what your lactate threshold or your functional threshold power there. So because we don't all have ways of measuring lactate in our blood, we use our power meter, and there's all sorts of backing behind several testing protocols that get pretty good approximations, at least functional approximations of your threshold power that you can use to train against. Since you've got a power meter, we want to be able to use that tool. Anyway, probably more in depth there, but there's testing protocols we're going to follow. And the one key thing here is to keep following whatever you're doing to test and set an FTP that you're going to train against. Use the same system over and over. You want measurable, objective, repeatable results. And so using the same system to get those results is what's going to get you there. And we talk about here in power-based training levels. So once you've understood what your threshold power is, there is a chart that basically says, okay, at these different percentages of your FTP, these are designated training zones. And there's different reasons you would train at those different power zones, and you would train in those different power zones for different amounts of time. And so kind of getting an understanding of that, we dig into that. I think even in a further chapter, we go into more detail. So chapter 4, training racing with power meter, we had Nate Dunn from Data Driven Athlete. And this is all about understanding what they call the power profile chart, or in other words, it's a way to objectively measure what your strengths and weaknesses are. This is a chart that basically lines out your best, I think it's 1 minute, 5 minute, 10 minute, 20 minute efforts. And it compares them on a generally acceptable scale of where typical racers lie in those areas. It's a statistical average, not a, the chart basically says, look, if you can do X number of watts per kilogram for this amount of time, we'd put you as a Cat 4 or a Cat 5 or a Cat 2 or a UCI Pro. So they use that chart, basically look at your different effort levels and say, okay, are you relatively much better at a 30-second effort than you are at a 20-minute effort? Or are those all for you, when you compare them in the, like when you compare against the global population of racers, are you pretty much straight across the board? And so understanding that is what gives you what they call kind of your rider classification. So we hear about this all the time in the Tour de France. He's a climber, the sprinter. So these boil down to, you know, what kind of power efforts they're good at for what durations. There is more to sprinting, especially, than just power numbers. Like, won't get into this, but picking the right line and say the final couple hundred meters of a sprint, because it can have pretty bad consequences if you don't, as we all saw in the tour yesterday. So these are the different classifications: all-rounder, sprinter, time trialist, climber, steady state, pursuiter. Kind of get into what those mean a little bit more in that chapter. Chapter 5 is all about talking about optimal workouts and using power. So this goes back into the power-based training zones, what they mean, and going into more depth, like, okay, what does a typical zone 2 workout look like? And how long does it typically go? And again, this is going to change depending on the level you're at. So an entry-level rider's zone 2 workout, like an entry-level rider may not even do zone 2 workouts. So this is kind of something you learn over time. But anyway, in that chapter, we talk about that. And so I guess when I say that an entry-level rider may not do a zone 2 workout, what I mean is typically as you add in more and more and more volume to your training, then your training starts to become more bipolar. So where you're going to do very specific harder efforts, and then maybe more specific steadier, longer efforts, like a zone 2 workout. And so as you have short amounts of time to train, which most typical entry-level riders do, you get a lot of bang for your buck for just sitting more towards the upper end rather than just riding zone 2 as an entry-level rider. So we talk about that in more detail, but that's kind of a 10,000 foot summary of it. But that's what we cover in chapter 5. Chapter 6 is all about, all right, done some workouts, we've got some data. What do we make of this? Let's start looking into the details of how we interpret our data. We had Nate Dunn come in. He gave a great, very specific guidance on the way he does it. But here's kind of some of the most common pieces people look at. You'll look at distribution charts of power cadence. Talk about kind of what you can pick from those distribution charts. Talked about the critical power chart, which will show for a given ride kind of what your different power levels were for different durations. We talked about what are the kind of analysis we're going to do cross workouts or cross different races, multi-file analysis. So, chapter 7 had Taylor Thomas of Thomas Endurance Coaching, and we talked about going beyond average power. So, average power is a good, interesting metric to have, but it does not tell the whole story. And this is all what Chapter 7 is about, understanding what are the other pieces of information that you use to help you interpret, from looking at the numbers, the characteristics of your ride. And so an algorithm to compute something called normalized power, which is it's a representation of the strain that ride took on your body if you were to have rode basically steady for the whole workout. And so average power, if you're doing a lot of hard efforts and then easy, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But normalized power, typically when you have burstier, harder workouts, it's going to give you a number higher than average power. In fact, it's impossible to get a normalized power less than your average power. That just takes into account the stochastic nature of your power data, or does that mean the fact that your power data can be all over the place? The intensity factor, then we look at normalized power in relation to your threshold. Taking that and the duration of your ride into account, we come up with something called training stress score. And training and stress score is what feeds into most training plans when you're starting to plan for multiple weeks, months. You start looking at your overall training load for those weeks, and that's where TSS comes into play. Okay, Chapter 8. So perfect lead in here. I talk about TSS, the performance manager chart. So I talked about multi-week planning analysis. Performance manager chart comes into play here because this is basically tracking or projecting, depending on if you're looking backwards or forwards, your fitness level and your fatigue. And these are the two pieces of information that you basically try to balance as you are training, picking your workouts. There's times where you're trying to do really hard workouts to build your fitness. At the same time, you're also building lots of fatigue. And you need to take some shorter parts where your fatigue can drop and you can recover. Now, fatigue will drop faster than your fitness, and that's where tapering comes into play. You basically let that fatigue drop off while maintaining fitness, and that's where you peak. And there's all sorts of protocols for that tapering. In fact, next week we're going to have Taylor Thomas on from Thomas Endurance Coaching, who's going to talk specifically around tapering for an event. Very timely time of the year to talk about that, because I think a lot of us are starting to have our big events. We've been training a lot, and we're kind of like, well, what do I do? I mean, I've heard about a taper. I've heard some different things. Taylor's going to talk about his beliefs and methodology around tapering. So that'll be next week. Fits right into the performance manager chart. Okay. Chapter 9, talked about developing a power-based training plan. So I think actually I talked about this last week. And key takeaway here was, what's your reason for training? If it's for an event, sign up for an event early, assess how much time you have, and take that time ahead and break it down into progression, or basically harder efforts and easier efforts, and building and recovering. And so that's what a power-based training plan is all about. And you use your training and stress score, TCL, ATL, to back that up from a numbers perspective and fit that into your time frame and your calendar. Okay, a couple other things, miscellaneous items we've covered. In fact, this was 2 weeks ago. We talked about the Power Meter Buyer's Guide that DC Rainmaker puts out. If you're in the market to buy a power meter, which if you're watching the show, you either already have one or you've heard about it a lot and you're not quite sure. We talk about, and we've had a couple episodes where we talk about that Power Meter's Buyer's Guide and what are the key pieces. The key takeaway is there's not one perfect power meter for everyone. It depends on many things. It depends on the physical build of your bike and where it's going to be easiest for you to put a power meter, or maybe how many bikes you have, and if you're going to have power across those different bikes, you got to take that into account. Also, how do you plan to record the power data can be a factor. So great write-up on DC Rainmaker's blog about this. Definitely, if you have not seen this page from him, go read it. Awesome content. And then we've also talked about specifically drilling down, making your own training plan, looking at it from, okay, got this much time until my event, or this time much time through the season. Here's my events. I'm going to pick the hard weeks and the easy weeks, and I'm going to build that up so that I'm working towards a peak. And I know I need to have about this much TSS per week for the hard weeks and the easy weeks. And so that's what I think we talked about that. That might have been last week, actually, we talked about that one. I forget which weeks to talk about what. But that's a good one if you haven't ever done your own training plan. It's something I might recommend here. If you've never built your own training plan, I would recommend almost your first time going and just either, there's plenty of structured workout plans you can purchase, or there's some for free in Zwift actually that you can follow for several weeks. And I think that'll give you a good flavor of how a typical training plan is structured. So kind of following one for your first time through is a good way to then say, okay, I see what they were doing here, I followed that, now I'm going to rinse and repeat that. And now I understand I want to tweak this, add here, take away. So that would be my recommendation as well. Okay, I hinted to this already, but next week we're going to have Taylor Thomas from Thomas Endurance Coaching talking about peaking for an event. Be there. It's going to be great. I know this is something I can definitely improve on. I always second guess myself on the taper, but I think getting Taylor's perspective on this will be pretty good. Also want to remind you that we have the pre-order for the Team ODZ kit online right now. We're very close on, we have several pieces of met minimums, and we're about ready to open up an order. There's a couple other pieces we haven't hit minimums on. So if you've been wanting to get a Team ODZ kit, check out the site teamodz.com/kit-pre-order right there on the screen, and check out what we've got. And the way this works is you'll submit a pre-order where you just indicate which pieces you want in quantities. We monitor volume, and then when we know we can hit minimums, we say, okay, we're going to open it up in official order, and then you'll be able to actually go pay for those items, and we'll put in the order, and it'll take about an 6 to 8 week turnaround from once the orders are placed to when we get them back. So with that, we are going to move into the question and answer section. If you have any questions, let it fly in the Facebook chat. If you just enjoy the show, let us know it's that too. We've got lots of great content on the channel. Got the Skills and Drills ride this afternoon. Ian Murray from Evil Elf Racing talks about the tactics for racing. We've also got a new streamer on board. We've got Adam Toledo, or calls himself Toledo Torpedo. Does some great content doing his workouts. You get a feel for what some of the OD Zwifter workouts look like. Check him out. We've also got lots of other streamers. Ken, I'm going to butcher his name, Garastat, Kurt Powell's doing some racer focused stuff. We got Mitch Dangermond doing the OD Zwifters as well. Group workouts together. Man, I could go on and on. We've got, well, quick summary. Go to the top of the page, and there is a calendar there where we have all of our regular events that are repeated on the week there, kind of show you what the main structure is. There's also more content other than that. It's kind of done on a little bit more, might change from week to week, so it's not in the graphic, but So if you just like the page, you get notified as we plan those or as we go live. You can go ahead and jump in on whichever one suits your fancy. If you are really enjoying this training information, training with the power, you wanted to maybe discuss it a little bit more in depth, we have a good group. There's a private Facebook group, Team ODZ, that you can go ahead and join, and we have great conversations in there. You've got in-depth questions you want to get answers from people, and maybe more than just me. We've got a big community of everyone who's got slightly different experiences, and there's good conversations that go in there. You can feel free to ask your questions, and we will be glad to share our experiences and hopefully help answer your questions. So with that, seeing no questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today. We'll be back next week. Appreciate having you guys here, and really appreciate Training Peaks for supporting the show. A lot of times when we get down to different training software, talk about some of these concepts. Whew, apparently I just did a PR. I got lots of confetti.
That was me, sorry.
Oh, it was you. Okay, Dave.
Just kidding.
So well, it got really loud in my ear, and I'm sure it was loud on the broadcast as well. Lost my train of thought there. Not sure where I was going. Thank you, Confetti, for doing that. Oh, Training Peaks, yeah. So we actually have a discount code to offer if you've been looking into getting Training Peaks premium services, or we talk about kind of how that software can help. We also talk about there are alternatives that have no monetary cost. And actually, there's a free version of Training Peaks as well. But if you decide to go down that route, we have I recommend it. I use it myself, actually. I particularly enjoy being able to plan out my training ahead of time for Training Peaks. I kind of built some complex spreadsheets myself to do it, but I definitely feel like the Training Peaks software makes that job a lot easier and a lot more precise for me. So if you enter in the promo code ODZ20 or ODZ20, get yourself 20% off Training Peaks premium services. And so we appreciate their support of the show and offering that discount code for the viewers, and appreciate having you here. And again, any questions or comments, leave them in the show notes or in the show comments afterwards, or join us in the Facebook group. And what would life be without Training Peaks, John? True story. They definitely make our lives a lot easier. So again, thank you for coming. Hit the like button on the page if you want to see more content. We are happy you came, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.